Outside the Tower of London, where ancient stone walls have witnessed centuries of combat, a leather-clad biker twirls his heavy chain with a sneering grin. To him, the stoic guard in ceremonial red is nothing but a tourist prop. But beneath that bearskin hat stands a man who earned his stripes in the paratroopers, trained in the art of dropping violent men in seconds. As the chain whistles through the air, tourists are about to learn why the Queen's Guard perfect combat skills, not just marching drills. That cocky smile, it's got about 3 seconds left. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow I've got something really special for you. And now, back to the video. The summer air crackles with tension. Phones rise in a forest of extended arms as tourists sense the impending confrontation. A child clutches her mother's leg. An elderly veteran's weathered face darkens with concern. They all see what the biker doesn't. The subtle shift in the guard's stance, the infinitesimal tightening of his grip on his ceremonial rifle, the barely perceptible tensing of combat-hardened muscles beneath ceremonial red wool. The biker, all tattooed arms and misplaced, confident, takes another step forward. His chain draws lazy circles in the air, each rotation adding weight to the inevitable confrontation. The metal links catch the afternoon sun, throwing sinister shadows across the courtyard's ancient stones. "Come on, mate," he taunts, voice carrying, across the courtyard. "Show us what the Queen's little toy soldier can do." Behind those eyes, trained in Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain, Sergeant James Harrison catalogues every detail: the chain's arc, the biker's slightly unsteady stance, the smell of alcohol barely masked by leather and bravado. 6 years in the parachute regiment taught him how quickly situations like this turn lethal. 2 tours showed him how to end them before they do. His mind flashes to similar confrontations in Helmand province, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. The crowd has grown, drawn by the electric tension in the air. American tourists whisper about the strict rules governing the Queen's Guard's behavior, not understanding that these same rules grant Harrison full authority to neutralize threats. A group of schoolchildren, earlier laughing at the guard's rigid posture, now huddle behind their teacher, sensing the dangerous undercurrent beneath the ceremonial surface. Time slows. A breeze stirs the plume of Harrison's bearskin hat. The chain's shadow dances across ancient cobblestones that have seen centuries of violence. In 3 seconds, they'll see another. Harrison's mind is clear, his breathing steady. Years of training have prepared him for moments exactly like this. The biker lunges, chain arcing toward Harrison's head. Tourist gasps merge into a collective intake of breath. But they're about to witness something few civilians ever see. Why the Queen's Guard are soldiers first, sentries second. Why every man who stands this post carries combat experience alongside ceremonial honors. Harrison doesn't move. Not yet. He's waded through longer nights in worse places, watched more dangerous men make fatal mistakes. The chain is halfway through its arc when a trace of doubt finally flickers across the biker's face. The tourist facade is about to drop, revealing the warrior beneath. He's about to learn what every enemy of the crown has discovered since 1660. These guards aren't for show. And that chain? It's about to become evidence. In the split second before action erupts, Harrison's combat-trained mind has already mapped out exactly how this encounter will end. The only question is whether the biker will require medical attention afterward. Sergeant James Harrison hadn't always stood as still as stone. 4 hours earlier, in the pre-dawn quiet of his modest London flat, he'd moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who never quite left the military behind. His morning routine was a symphony of precision. Uniform pressed to knife-edge perfection, boots polished to mirror shine, every brass button gleaming with ruthless attention to detail. Each morning, this ritual grounded him, connecting him to thousands of guardsmen who had done the same over centuries of service. In the bathroom mirror, he studied his reflection while adjusting his collar. At 32, his face carried the weathered dignity of a soldier who'd seen more than most. A thin scar above his right eyebrow, a souvenir from Helmand province, caught the fluorescent light. His wife Sarah always said it made him look distinguished. But to Harrison, it was a daily reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. The scar had astery behind it, like most of his battle wounds. A night operation gone sideways, 2 of his men down, and a split-second decision that had saved their lives but left its mark. "You're going to be late," Sarah called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the gentle concern of someone who'd spent years loving a man married to duty. The smell of coffee and toast wafted through their small flat domestic comfort that still felt foreign some mornings. Even after 3 years of marriage, Harrison sometimes woke up expecting to hear mortar fire instead of London traffic, to feel sand instead of cotton sheets. Sarah understood these moments better than most. As a military nurse, she'd seen her share of combat trauma, treated the wounds that went deeper than skin. They'd met at a military hospital in Germany, where Harrison was recovering from the operation that gave him his scar. She'd been the one to change his bandages, to help him through the physical therapy, to remind him that strength wasn't just about fighting. Harrison emerged from the bathroom to find his 5-year-old daughter, Emma, already dressed in her school uniform, practicing her own version of the Guards' March across their living room. Her bearskin hat was made of construction paper, but her determination was real enough. "Daddy, look, I'm guarding the Queen too." Her small feet attempted the precise movements she'd watched her father practice countless times in their backyard. He scooped her up, her giggles cutting through the morning quiet. "Perfect form, soldier," he said, his stern guard's expression cracking into a smile. Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, her eyes soft with understanding. She'd known what she was signing up for when she married a soldier, but the guard duties were a different kind of service, less dangerous than Afghanistan perhaps, but demanding in their own way. The walls of their flat told the story of their life together. Photos of Harrison in his para uniform standing proudly beside his unit, his guard's ceremonial dress uniform on their wedding day, Emma's first visit to the Tower of London. Mixed among them were the medals, campaign medals from Afghanistan, the commendation for bravery under fire, the ceremonial honors from his guard service. Each one represented a chapter in a life dedicated to service, to protecting others. "Will you be home for dinner?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. Tuesday meant evening drill practice, followed by the weekly briefing on potential security threats. The tourist season was picking up, and with it came the usual increase in incidents. Last week alone, 3 guards had reported aggressive confrontations with visitors who seemed more interested in provoking a reaction than taking photos. "Should be done by 8, Harrison replied, setting Emma down and crossing to kiss his wife. "Goodbye." Sarah's hand lingered on his chest, straightening an already straight collar. It was their morning ritual, her way of staying connected to a man who would spend the next 12 hours being unreachable, untouchable. Her fingers brushed against the wound of his chest. Another scar, another story, another reminder of how close she'd come to losing him. "Just remember," she said, her voice carrying its usual mix of pride and concern. "Those tourists don't know. They're dealing with an ex-para. Try not to traumatize them too badly." Her smile didn't quite hide her worry. She'd seen the YouTube videos of guards dealing with disruptive tourists, read the online comments mocking the toy soldiers. If they only knew the truth about the men behind the ceremonial uniforms. Emma tugged at his sleeve, her face serious. "Daddy, can you teach me the proper march today? Miss Thompson says I need to practice for the school play." Harrison knelt down to her level, seeing in her eyes the same determination he'd carried as a child, dreaming of serving in uniform. "Tonight, love, we'll practice until you're the best guard in your class." The drive to the tower was Harrison's time to transition. With each mile, he let the warmth of home fade, replaced by the cool professional detachment required for the job. The morning news droned from the radio, another story about budget cuts to the military, debates about the relevance of traditional ceremonial units in the modern age. Harrison allowed himself a grim smile. The politicians who questioned the guard's necessity had never stood watch during a terror alert, never felt the weight of centuries of tradition and duty pressing down with each step of the march. His route took him past the spots where recent incidents had occurred. The pub where 3 drunk tourists had tried to make a guard laugh, escalating to physical harassment. The corner where a social media prankster had attempted to steal a bearskin hat for views. Each location represented a growing trend of disrespect, of treating the guards as entertainment rather than soldiers. In the guard room, Harrison joined his fellow sentries for the morning briefing. Corporal Mike "Steady" Stevens, a former Royal Marine with whom Harrison had served in Afghanistan, was already there, meticulously checking his rifle. They exchanged the slight nods of men who'd seen each other at their best and worst. Stevens had been there the night Harrison got his scar, had helped carry their wounded men to safety. "Heard about Jenkins?" Stevens asked, his voice low. Harrison shook his head. "Tourist tried to grab his rifle yesterday. Proper job too, not just the usual selfie attempt." There was a collective tensing among the men. They'd all dealt with their share of disruptive tourists, but lately there seemed to be more edge to the encounters, more deliberate provocations. Private Thomas, the youngest among them at 23, spoke up. "My sister sent me a link to a TikTok challenge going around. People trying to make the guards break character, filming it for likes." The disgust in his voice was evident. "Some of them are offering money for the best reaction video." Captain Williams, their commanding officer, entered with his usual brisk efficiency. A veteran of Iraq and a former member of the Special Air Service, Williams carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd earned every stripe the hard way. "Gentlemen, yesterday's incident is exactly why we're increasing security awareness. Intelligence suggests we might see more deliberate provocations, possibly coordinated through social media." He paused, making eye contact with each man. "Remember, you're not just ceremonial guards. You're serving soldiers of the British Army. Act accordingly." The briefing continued with updates on patrol routes, potential threats, and the day's VIP visits. Harrison absorbed it all with professional focus, but part of his mind was already on his post. The tower's east gate was his assignment today, a highly visible position that attracted more than its share of trouble. It was the same post where, 2 months ago, a guard had been forced to draw his ceremonial sword when a group of frowdy tourists became aggressive. As they prepared to take their posts, Stevens caught Harrison's arm. "Watch yourself out there, mate. Something feels off today." Harrison nodded. They'd both developed a sixth sense for trouble during their combat tours, and Stevens' instincts were rarely wrong. That sense had saved their lives more than once in Afghanistan's dusty streets. The morning sun was just touching the tower's ancient stones as Harrison marched to his post, rifle at shoulder arms, each step measured and precise. Tourists were already gathering, cameras ready. He could hear their excited chatter, see them positioning themselves for photos. Most were respectful, but there were always a few who saw the guard's ceremonial uniform as an invitation to test boundaries. As Harrison took his position, settling into the familiar stance of attention, he ran through his mental checklist. Clear, fields of fire, potential cover positions, escape routes, old combat habits that had served him well. The weight of the rifle in his hands was comforting, even if it wasn't loaded. He knew that smaller weapons were concealed around the tower, ready if needed. The public saw ceremony, but beneath the surface, the guard was always ready for action. Group of schoolchildren approached, their teacher attempting to explain the significance of the Queen's Guard. Harrison remained motionless, but his senses stayed sharp, scanning the growing crowd. Somewhere in London, his daughter was probably in her own classroom, proudly telling her friends about her daddy who guarded the Queen. The thought almost brought a smile to his face. Almost. The morning wore on, a steady stream of tourists passing, before him like a human tide. Harrison's body maintained its rigid posture, while his mind stayed alert, watching, waiting. Years of military service had taught him that trouble rarely announced itself. It crept in quietly, disguised as just another ordinary moment. He didn't know it yet, but in a few hours, a man with a chain and a chip on his shoulder would prove just how right that lesson was. The first hint of trouble came at 11:42 a.m., though Harrison wouldn't realize its significance until later. A group of bikers had rolled up to the tower's main entrance, their custom Harleys rattling the ancient stonework with aggressive revs. Nothing too unusual for a summer morning in London, except for the way they lingered, phones out, filming each other as they made exaggerated marches, mocking the guards' ceremonial walk. Harrison maintained his position, face impassive, but his combat-trained senses were already cataloging details. 6 men, all wearing matching leather vests with a crude skull design. Their leader, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a neck thick with tattoos, seemed familiar somehow. The man's swagger, The way he directed the others with subtle hand gestures sparked recognition in Harrison's mind. Military training, possibly. Ex-service, but the kind who'd left under a cloud. Through his earpiece, Harrison heard Stephen's voice, calm but alert. "Control, we've got a situation developing at the East Gate. Known troublemakers from last month's Westminster incident." Harrison's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He remembered the report. A group of bikers who'd harassed the guards at Parliament, escalating until police intervention was needed. No arrests made, but several viral videos had resulted, encouraging copycat incidents. The tourists around Harrison sensed the changing atmosphere. The usual excited chatter dimmed, replaced by uncertain murmurs. Parents pulled their children closer, cameras lowered. Even the pigeons seemed to scatter, as if sensing the approaching storm. "Oi, soldier boy." The leader's voice carried across the courtyard, deliberately loud, playing to his friends' cameras. "Got a question about that fancy hat of yours." He was approaching now, each step a calculated performance for his filming audience. The chain, heavy motorcycle chain wrapped in leather, swung casually from his right hand. Harrison remained motionless, but his mind was racing through scenarios, threat assessments, response protocols. Rule 427. Guards may leave their post if a clear and present danger exists. Rule 429. Proportional force is authorized to protect Crown property and personnel. These regulations, drilled into every guard, were about to be tested. Control to all. Posts. Captain Williams' voice crackled through the earpiece. Subject identified as Marcus's mad dog Thorn. Former Royal Artillery, discharged for conduct unbecoming. Multiple arrests for assault. Consider armed and dangerous. Harrison's training kicked in, muscle memory from countless combat situations. His grip on the rifle shifted microscopically, ready. Thorn was 10 feet away now, his friends' phones tracking every move. "You know what I heard?" He raised his voice, playing to the growing crowd. "Heard these boys ain't real soldiers anymore. Just dancing monkeys for the tourists." A few nervous laughs from his crew, but the other tourists were backing away, creating a hollow in the crowd. 8 feet. Harrison could smell the leather, the beer on Thorn's breath. Behind the biker, a young mother was hurrying her children away, her face pale. An elderly man in a veteran's beret watched from the sidelines, his expression grim. They all knew what was coming. "Saw your type in Basra," Thorn continued, twirling the chain now, all proper and polished until the real fighting started. "Then where were you?" 6 feet away, Harrison's combat awareness heightened, time seeming to slow as adrenaline surged. He noted the biker's stance, the way he favored his left leg slightly. An old injury, perhaps. Through his earpiece, Harrison heard the rapid deployment of response teams, but they'd never make it in time. This would be over in seconds, one way or another. His mind flashed to Sarah, to Emma practicing her march that morning. To the scar above his eye that reminded him how quickly situations could turn lethal. "No answer, eh?" Thorn's voice turned ugly. "Let's see if we can make the toy soldier dance." The chain began its arc, sunlight glinting off the metal links. In that split second, Harrison saw everything with crystal clarity. The phones recording, the horrified tourists, Stevens moving into position from the side, and most importantly, the exact trajectory that chain would take. 4 feet. The chain whistled through the air, and Harrison's world narrowed to a single point of focus. Everything that followed would be analyzed, debated, and replayed millions of times on social media. But in that moment, there was only the soldier and the threat, the culmination of years of training and combat experience, 3 feet. Harrison's body tensed, ready to shatter the illusion of the ceremonial guard. In Afghanistan, he'd learned that hesitation meant death. Here, surrounded by tourists and cameras, the stakes were different but no less critical. This wasn't just about personal safety, it was about maintaining the honor and dignity of centuries of tradition. 2 feet. Thorn's confident smirk began to falter as he registered something changing in Harrison's stance. The other bikers, so eager with their cameras seconds ago, sensed it too. This wasn't going according to their script. The toy soldier wasn't playing along, 1 foot. Time crystallized into perfect clarity. Harrison could see the exact moment Thorn realized his mistake, the flash of uncertainty in his eyes as he recognized the look of a trained combatant. But it was too late to stop the chain's momentum, too late to take back the challenge he'd issued. The chain sliced through the space where Harrison's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. But Harrison wasn't there anymore. Years of combat training, countless drills, and the muscle memory of survival took over. His movement was fluid, precise, unstoppable, the ceremonial guard transforming into the warrior beneath. In the next 3 seconds, several things happened simultaneously. Harrison's rifle, though unloaded, became a perfect defensive tool, its hardened stock deflecting the chain with a resounding crack. His left hand shot out, grabbing the chain's momentum and using it to pull Thorne off balance. His right foot pivoted, and decades of military hand-to-hand combat training came into play. The crowd gasped collectively as Thorne's world turned upside down. The big man went airborne, his own chain used against him, his cocky expression replaced by shock. He hit the cobblestones with a thud that echoed off the tower's ancient walls. Before he could recover, Harrison had him pinned, the ceremonial rifle, across his throat, one knee precisely positioned to eliminate any thought of resistance. "Armed response team, move in." Captain Williams' voice crackled through the earpiece, but it was already over. The other bikers, their phones still recording, backed away as Stevens and 2 more guards approached, their own combat training evident in every step. Thorne lay there, gasping, staring up at Harrison with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. "You're not just a guard, are you?" he managed to wheeze out. Harrison's voice, when it came, was quiet, but carried across the suddenly silent courtyard. "Queen's Guard, 2nd Battalion, Parachute Regiment. We are all serving soldiers, sir. Remember that next time." The crowd erupted in applause, phones still recording as armed response teams flooded the area. But Harrison's mind was already shifting to the aftermath. This would be all over social media within minutes. There would be inquiries, interviews, endless questions about use of force. But as he heard Emma's voice in his head, proudly telling her friends about her daddy who guarded the Queen, he knew he'd done exactly what was needed. The toy soldier had shown his teeth, and the world would never look at the Queen's Guard quite the same way again. 2 hours after the incident, Harrison sat in Captain Williams' office, his bearskin hat placed carefully on the desk between them. The YouTube video had already hit 1 million views. Queen's Guard takedown was trending worldwide, and the Tower of London's switchboard was overwhelmed with media inquiries. Outside, a crowd of reporters huddled in the rain, cameras trained on every entrance. "You did everything by the book, Harrison," Williams said, reviewing the incident report for the 3rd time. "Proportional force, clear threat, textbook response." He paused, tapping his pen against the desk. "But this isn't going away quietly. Thorne's got connections, former military, private security firms, and he's playing the victim card hard on social media." Harrison's phone buzzed again. Another call from Sarah. She'd seen the video, of course. Everyone had. Emma's school had called too, asking if she needed to be picked up early after some older kids showed her the viral clip of her father in action. The thought of his daughter seeing that violence, even in defense, churned his stomach. "Sir, I stand by my actions," Harrison said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. The threat was real. "The chain? I know, Sergeant, but this isn't Afghanistan. This is the age of social media and public perception." William slid a tablet across the desk. On the screen, Thorne was giving an interview from the hospital, his arm in Asling. The bruises on his face looked worse under the harsh hospital lighting, perfect for the cameras. "Listen to this. I was just having a bit of fun." Thorne's voice dripped with practiced innocence. "These guards, they're supposed to be a tourist attraction, right? Next thing I know, I'm being assaulted by a man who's clearly got PTSD or something. Is this what we want representing Britain to the world?" Harrison's jaw tightened. The media was already running with that angle. The traumatized soldier, the excessive response, the changing role of the Queen's Guard in modern Britain. None of them mentioned Thorne's discharge from the military, his history of violence, the calculated nature of his provocation. Stevens knocked and entered, his face grim. "Sir, you need to see this." He handed over his phone. A new hashtag was trending. Demilitarize the Guard. Alongside it, videos of other incidents were being shared, carefully edited clips showing guards shouting at tourists, moments of confrontation taken out of context. Their public image was being systematically dismantled pixel by pixel. "What are my orders, sir?" Harrison asked, though he already knew the answer. "Stand fast, maintain dignity, show no weakness." William stood, walking to the window that overlooked the tower's ancient courtyard. "For now, regular duties continue, but stay alert. Thorne's crew won't take this lying down, and you've become a target." He turned back, his expression serious. "And Harrison, tell Sarah to be careful. These people, they'll use anything, anyone, to get what they want." The implications hung heavy in the air. Harrison thought of Sarah walking Emma to school, of their quiet life, suddenly thrust into the spotlight. He thought of the other guards' families, all potentially at risk now because of his actions. "There's more," Stevens added, scrolling through his phone. Social media chatter suggests organized provocations at multiple guard posts across London. They're calling it testing the real soldiers, professional agitators paid to provoke reactions. Harrison absorbed this, his military mind, already gaming out scenarios, potential threats, response options, but this wasn't a battlefield he was trained for. The enemy wasn't carrying weapons but smartphones. The objective wasn't territory but public opinion. "One more thing," Williams said, picking up Harrison's bearskin hat and examining it carefully. "Parliament's asking questions. There's talk of a review of guard protocols, modernizing the role. Some are suggesting replacing ceremonial rifles with non-military symbols. The very identity of the Queen's Guard, centuries of tradition, honor and service, was being challenged. And Harrison's actions, meant to protect that tradition, had inadvertently provided ammunition to those who sought to dismantle it, as if reading his thoughts, Williams added, "This isn't your fault, Harrison. Thorne and his people, they've been planning something like this for months. You just happened to be the trigger they needed." Harrison stood, accepting his hat back from Williams. Its weight felt heavier now, laden with more than just tradition. "Permission to return to duties, sir." "Granted. But Harrison," Williams' voice stopped him at the door. "Whatever happens next, remember you're not just defending a post anymore. You're defending everything the Guard stands for." Walking back to his post, Harrison passed through the tower's ancient corridors, footsteps echoing off stones that had witnessed centuries of British history. Each step reminded him of Emma's morning march practice, of Sarah's proud smile, of his fellow guard standing tall despite the gathering storm. The tourists parted before him, phones raised, waiting for another viral moment. But Harrison's face remained impassive, his bearing perfect, his duty unchanged. Let them film, let them watch. The Guard had weathered worse storms than this, but in his mind, a clock was ticking. Somewhere out there, Thorne and his allies were planning their next move. And next time, they wouldn't settle for just a viral video. The next morning brought rain and reporters to the Tower of London. Harrison marched to his post, through a gauntlet of cameras and microphones, maintaining his ceremonial bearing despite the chaos. The tourists had doubled overnight, everyone hoping to see the viral Guard in action. Their phones tracked his every movement, hungry for the next sensation. But something fundamental had changed. The usual respectful distance was gone, replaced by a dangerous familiarity. People pressed closer, phones raised, hoping to provoke another reaction. Each step of his march was scrutinized, every movement analyzed for signs of the warrior they'd glimpsed yesterday. "Control to Harrison." Stevens's voice came through his earpiece, tight with tension. "We've got movement on social media. Thorne's biker groups are organizing something they're calling Guard Challenge. Multiple chapters, multiple locations. They're trying to provoke similar incidents across London." Through the corner of his eye, Harrison spotted them. Leather-clad, figures at the perimeter, phones ready, watching. Not Thorne's original crew, but copycats, followers drawn by the scent of social media fame. The ripples were becoming waves. Sarah had seen it coming. That morning she'd held him longer than usual before he left. "Be careful," she'd whispered, her nurse's hand straightening his already straight collar. "Emma's already talking about how her daddy's a superhero who fights bad guys. I need you to come home to us." The fear in her eyes had cut deeper than any chain could. A group of teenagers approached his post, giggling, smartphones ready. One boy, trying to impress his friends, started mimicking Thorne's chain-swinging motion. Harrison's combat instinct screamed at him to react, but he remained motionless. This was the new battlefield, not against physical threats, but against the erosion of everything the guard represented. Movement at the West Gate, Control reported. Group of 5, matching Thorne's crew's description, their live streaming. Similar reports came in from Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, St. James's Palace. The infection was spreading. Harrison maintained his post as the morning wore on, watching the subtle signs of deterioration around him. Tourists who once posed respectfully now made rude gestures, hoping to provoke a reaction. Children wows to watch in awe now mimicked combat moves, encouraged by laughing parents. During his brief break, Harrison checked his phone. Emma's teacher had sent a message. Some parents were complaining about having that guard's daughter in their children's class. Worried about violent influences. Sarah's hospital had received calls asking about her connection to the aggressive guard. Their private life was unraveling, thread by thread. Stevens appeared at his side, face tight with concern. They're organizing. James, not just random provocateurs anymore. Someone's coordinating this, funding it. The Guard Challenge has sponsorship now. Energy drinks, betting sites, social media platforms. Harrison's mind raced behind his impassive expression. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. Someone was orchestrating a campaign, using Thorne's humiliation as kindling for a larger fire. But why? What was their objective? News feeds scrolled on the guard room's monitors. Modernizing the monarchy. Time to retire the Queen's Guard. Military presence at tourist sites, outdated and dangerous. Private security firms offer safer alternative to traditional guards. Private security. The pieces started coming together in Harrison's mind. This wasn't just about viral videos and social media fame. Someone was creating a problem that they could conveniently solve, for a price. As he resumed his post, Harrison noticed new faces in the crowd. Men with military bearing poorly concealed under civilian clothes, studying the tower's security, set up with professional interest. Private contractors measuring for their sales pitch. The rain continued to fall, but the tourists kept coming. Each hour brought new provocations, new challenges, new phones pointed at his expressionless face. But Harrison stood firm, remembering Williams's words. He wasn't just defending a post anymore. He was defending a tradition that stretched back centuries. But how do you defend tradition against viral videos? How do you maintain dignity while the world demands spectacle? The answers wouldn't come easy, but Harrison knew one thing. He wouldn't give them what they wanted. Not today. Captain Williams's office had become a crisis center. Maps of London covered the walls, each guard postmarked, each potential threat noted. Social media feeds scrolled on multiple screens, tracking the growing Guard Challenge movement. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a ceremonial sword. It spread to Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, Stevens reported, pointing to red markers on the map. 3 incidents this morning alone. No injuries, but morale's taking a hit. The younger guards especially. They're not all combat veterans, like you, Harrison. Some of them are starting to crack under the pressure. Harrison studied the patterns emerging on the map. This wasn't just random chaos anymore. The incidents were coordinated, escalating, testing their responses. And behind it all, Thorne's social media presence grew. He'd become a sort of folk hero to certain groups, the man who exposed the violence beneath the guard's ceremonial exterior. "We've got a bigger problem," Williams announced, entering with a fresh intelligence report. "Remember those private security contractors we spotted? They're from Blackstone Security. Thorne's connected to them, has been for months. They're using this incident to lobby for replacing ceremonial guards with private security, more modern and appropriate, they're saying." The room fell silent. This was more than just viral videos now. This was an attack on centuries of tradition, on the very identity of the Queen's Guard, and Harrison had unknowingly become the centerpiece of their campaign. Private Thompson, their youngest guard, spoke up from his position by the door. "Sir, my sister works in social media. She says there's chatter about something big planned for next week's changing of the guard ceremony. Multiple locations, coordinated action." Williams nodded grimly. Intelligence confirms it. They're calling it the Final Guard Challenge. Blackstone's CEO is scheduled to give a press conference the same day, probably to offer their services when it all goes wrong. Harrison's mind went to Emma, to her paper bearskin hat and proud marching, to Sarah and her quiet strength, to his fellow guards, standing their posts despite the growing pressure. This wasn't just about Haim anymore. This was about everything they stood for. The public's divided, Stevens added, scrolling through social media feeds. Some support us, but more are buying into Blackstone's narrative. Modern security for a modern Britain. They're painting us as dangerous relics, obsolete soldiers playing at ceremony until we snap. Harrison stepped closer to the map, his trained eye picking out patterns in the reported incidents. They're probing our responses, sir. Testing reaction times, filming every move, building a case for their private security solution. Correct, Williams confirmed. And Parliament's listening. Budget committees are already talking about cost-effective alternatives to maintaining the Guard. 300 years of tradition, and they're ready to replace us with rent-a-cops because of some viral videos. The room's screens flickered with more incident reports. Another guard sworn at, another phone shoved in a face, another orchestrated provocation. The steady drip of dignity being eroded post by post, video by video. Sir, Harrison said, stepping forward, I request permission to develop a response plan, not just reactive, preventive. We need to show them that the Guard's strength isn't in violence, but in our discipline, our tradition, our unwavering duty. Williams studied him for a long moment. What are you suggesting, Sergeant? They want spectacle? Let's give them one, but on our terms. The changing of the Guard ceremony. If they're planning something big, so should we. Show the public what we really stand for. The captain considered this, his eyes moving from the map to the social media feeds to his waiting men. It's risky. One wrong move. With respect, sir, doing nothing is riskier. They're not just attacking our posts, they're attacking everything we represent. And if we lose that... Agreed, Williams finally said. But remember, Harrison, they're waiting for us to make another mistake, one wrong move, and we'll give them exactly what they want. Outside, the rain had stopped, but darker clouds were gathering. Tourist crowds still pressed against the barriers, phones still recorded every move, provocateurs still waited for their moment. The storm was coming, and this time, it would take more than combat training to weather it. Harrison straightened his uniform, preparing to return to his post. The weight of his bearskin hat reminded him of everything at stake. Not just his career or the Guard's reputation, but the very soul of a tradition that had stood watch over Britain for centuries. The next move was his. And somewhere out there, Thorne and Blackstone were watching, waiting for him to make it. 3 days before the changing of the Guard ceremony, Harrison discovered the first trace of betrayal. It came in the form of a text message mistakenly sent to his phone. Guard rotation confirmed for Thursday. H will beat East Gate. BS team ready. He stared at the message for a long moment, the implications sinking in. BS, Blackstone. Someone inside the tower was feeding them information, someone who knew the Guard rotations, the security protocols, their response plans. Someone close. Harrison found Stevens in the guard room methodically cleaning his rifle. We've got a problem, he said quietly, showing him the text. Stevens' face darkened as he read it. Check the number, Stevens suggested, his voice equally low. Harrison already had. The number belonged to Private Thompson, their youngest guard, the one whose sister worked in social media, the one who'd been so helpful with intelligence about the planned disruption. It could be coincidence, Harrison said, but they both knew better. The pieces were falling into place, how Blackstone always seemed one step ahead, how the provocateurs knew exactly where to position themselves, how. Their video angles were always perfect. Captain Williams took the news hard. Thompson's father works for Blackstone, he revealed, pulling up a personnel file. Regional director. The boy must have been their plant from the beginning. The betrayal cut deep. Thompson had trained with them, eaten with them, stood watch beside them. He'd attended Emma's birthday party just last month, brought her a stuffed bear wearing a tiny bearskin hat, and all the while he'd been feeding information to the enemy. Sir, Harrison said, we need to change the response plan for the ceremony. Thompson knows everything. No, Williams replied, surprising them both. We feed him false information. Let Blackstone think they know our playbook. Meanwhile, he outlined a new strategy, one so audacious it took Harrison's breath away. But before they could implement it, the situation exploded. Literally. The blast rocked the tower just after sunset. Small but strategic, it took out the primary security camera network. As alarms blared, Harrison and Stevens ran toward the smoke. They found Thompson there, checking the damage. The look that passed between the three men said everything. The game was up. Thompson ran. Harrison and Stevens pursued, their footsteps echoing off ancient stones. But Thompson knew exactly where he was going, straight to the waiting cameras of a dozen tourists with professional-grade equipment. "Help!" Thompson shouted as they emerged into the courtyard. "They're trying to silence me. I have proof of guard brutality." Phones rose, cameras rolled. The trap was sprung. Harrison and Stevens stopped short. They could catch Thompson easily, but that's exactly what Blackstone wanted. More footage of aggressive guards. More proof that they were dangerous and unstable. From the shadows, Harrison spotted Thorne recording everything, his arm out of its sling now. The pieces of their plan became clear. Thompson's exposure of guard brutality would be the final nail in their coffin. By this time tomorrow, it would be all over the news. But Harrison had seen worse traps in Afghanistan. Sometimes the best way out was straight through. He raised his hands, stepping into the light. "Private Thompson," he called, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Would you like to explain to these good people why you planted that device, or shall I?" Thompson froze. This wasn't in the script. "Perhaps," Harrison continued, "you could tell them about your father's position at Blackstone, about the contract they're bidding for." The cameras swung between them, capturing everything. Thompson's face went pale. "Stand down, Harrison," a new voice commanded. Robert Thorne emerged from the crowd, no longer playing the victim. Beside him stood an older man in an expensive suit. Thompson's father, Harrison realized. The Blackstone executive himself. "It's over," Thorne said. "We have all the footage we need. By tomorrow, the public will be begging for the guards to be replaced. Modern security for a modern Britain." Harrison smiled, and something in that smile made Thorne take a step back. Modern security? Harrison reached into his pocket, producing his phone. "Like your modern surveillance, the cameras you planted around the tower?" "What cameras?" Thorne demanded. "The ones Metropolitan Police Cyber Division is currently tracing. The ones documenting every payoff, every staged incident, every conspiracy to undermine a royal institution. Those cameras." The color drained from the elder Thompson's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Harrison nodded to Stevens, who produced a tablet. On it played footage of Thorne meeting with provocateurs, handing out cash, coordinating the spontaneous incidents. "We've been gathering evidences since day one. Did you really think the Queen's Guard would be so easy to outmaneuver?" The fallout was immediate and devastating. As Harrison and Stevens watched from the tower battlements the next morning, news helicopters circled overhead. But they weren't covering guard brutality. Instead, every channel broadcast the same story. Private security firms' conspiracy to undermine Queen's Guard exposed. Blackstone's stock was in freefall. The elder Thompson had been arrested, along with several board members. Thorne had disappeared, though intelligence suggested he'd fled to Spain. Private Thompson was in military custody, facing charges of conspiracy and treason, but victory had come at a price. "They're still coming," Stevens reported, checking his phone. "The final guard challenge. Different groups now, not connected to Blackstone. They want to prove themselves against the guards who exposed the conspiracy." Harrison nodded. They'd won the battle, but potentially intensified the war. The Queen's Guard was now seen as a worthy opponent, a challenge to be conquered. Their victory had painted an even bigger target on their backs. Sarah had taken Emma to stay with grandparents in Scotland, away from the media circus. The separation ate Harrison, but he knew it was necessary. Blackstone might be finished, but others would take their place. The game had changed permanently. Captain Williams called an emergency meeting of all guard commanders. "The good news," he began, "is that public opinion has shifted in our favor. The bad news, every thug and attention seeker in Europe sees us as the ultimate challenge now. The changing of the guard ceremony will be their Super Bowl. Harrison studied the intelligence reports. Dozens of groups were converging on London, each with their own agenda. Some wanted social media fame, others sought to prove themselves against the warrior guards. A few had darker motives, political statements, anti-monarchy protests, genuine threats. "We can't stop them all," Stephen said quietly. "We don't have to," Harrison replied. An idea had been forming in his mind, one that could either save the guard or destroy it completely. "We show them something they've never seen before." The plan he outlined was unprecedented. Instead of trying to maintain their usual ceremonial distance, they would give the public unprecedented access to guard training, traditions and values, not through social media stunts or viral videos, but through dignity, discipline and controlled transparency. "It's risky," Williams warned. "Once we open this door—" "The door's already open, sir," Harrison countered. "We can either hide behind our walls and watch our relevance fade, or we can show the world why the Queen's Guard has endured for centuries." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Every guard was briefed, every position reinforced. They coordinated with police, with anti-terrorism units, with royal protection squads. Nothing would be left to chance. Harrison spoke to Sarah every night, missing Emma's bedtime stories and morning marches. "Daddy," Emma asked during one call, "are you still a superhero?" He thought carefully before answering. "No, love. I'm just a soldier doing his duty. But sometimes, that's more." But Harrison had seen worse traps in Afghanistan. Sometimes, the best way out was straight through. He raised his hands, stepping into the light. "Private Thompson," he called, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Would you like to explain to these good people why you planted that device? Or shall I?" Thompson froze. "This wasn't in the script. Perhaps," Harrison continued, "you could tell them about your father's position at Blackstone, about the contract they're bidding for." The cameras swung between them, capturing everything. Thompson's face went pale. "Stand down, Harrison." A new voice commanded. Robert Thorne emerged from the crowd, no longer playing the victim. Beside him stood an older man in an expensive suit. Thompson's father, Harrison realized, the Blackstone executive himself. "It's over," Thorne said. "We have all the footage we need. By tomorrow, the public will be begging for the guards to be replaced. Modern security for a modern Britain." Harrison smiled, and something in that smile made Thorne take a step back. Modern security. Harrison reached into his pocket, producing his phone. "Like your modern surveillance? The cameras you planted around the tower?" "What cameras?" Thorne demanded. "The ones Metropolitan Police Cyber Division is currently tracing. The ones documenting every payoff, every staged incident, every conspiracy to undermine a royal institution. Those cameras." The color drained from the elder Thompson's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Harrison nodded to Stevens, who produced a tablet. On it played footage of Thorne meeting with provocateurs, handing out cash, coordinating the spontaneous incidents. "We've been gathering evidences since day one. Did you really think the Queen's Guard would be so easy to outmaneuver?" The fallout was immediate and devastating. As Harrison and Stevens watched from the tower battlements the next morning, news helicopters circled overhead. But they weren't covering guard brutality. Instead, every channel broadcast the same story. Private security firms' conspiracy to undermine Queen's Guard exposed. Blackstone's stock was in freefall. The elder Thompson had been arrested, along with several board members. Thorne had disappeared, though intelligence suggested he'd fled to Spain. Private Thompson was in military custody, facing charges of conspiracy and treason. But victory had come at a price. "They're still coming," Stevens reported, checking his phone. "The final guard challenge. Different groups now, not connected to Blackstone. They want to prove themselves against the guards who exposed the conspiracy." Harrison nodded. They'd won the battle, but potentially intensified the war. The Queen's Guard was now seen as a worthy opponent, a challenge to be conquered. Their victory had painted an even bigger target on their backs. Sarah had taken Emma to stay with grandparents in Scotland, away from the media circus. The separation atteed Harrison, but he knew it was necessary. Blackstone might be finished, but Others would take their place. The game had changed permanently. Captain Williams called an emergency meeting of all guard commanders. "The good news," he began, "is that public opinion has shifted in our favor. The bad news, every thug and attention seeker in Europe sees us as the ultimate challenge now. The changing of the guard ceremony will be their Super Bowl." Harrison studied the intelligence reports. Dozens of groups were converging on London, each with their own agenda. Some wanted social media fame, others sought to prove themselves against the warrior guards. A few had darker motives, political statements, anti-monarchy protests, genuine threats. "We can't stop them all," Stevens said quietly. "We don't have to," Harrison replied. An idea had been forming in his mind, one that could either save the guard or destroy it completely. "We show them something they've never seen before." The plan he outlined was unprecedented. Instead of trying to maintain their usual ceremonial distance, they would give the public unprecedented access to guard training, traditions and values, not through social media stunts or viral videos, but through dignity, discipline, and controlled transparency. "It's risky," Williams warned. "Once we open this door—" "The door's already open, sir," Harrison countered. "We can either hide behind our walls and watch our irrelevance fade, or we can show the world why the Queen's Guard has endured for centuries." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Every guard was briefed, every position reinforced. They coordinated with police, with anti-terrorism units, with royal protection squads. Nothing would be left to chance. Harrison spoke to Sarah every night, missing Emma's bedtime stories and morning marches. "Daddy," Em asked during one call, "are you still a superhero?" He thought carefully before answering. "No, love. I'm just a soldier doing his duty. But sometimes that's more important than being a superhero." The night before the ceremony, Harrison stood alone on the tower walls. Below, the city lights twinkled, helicopters circled, and somewhere out there, thousands prepared to test the guard's resolve. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "See you tomorrow, soldier." Thorne, back from Spain. Harrison didn't reply. He didn't need to. Tomorrow would answer for itself. In his quarters, he carefully prepared his uniform one last time. The brass buttons gleamed, the rifle's wood glowed with polish, the bearskin hat stood proud. His ceremonial sword, usually just for show, had been carefully sharpened. Sarah called one last time. "Be careful tomorrow," she said, worry clear in her voice. "Always am," he replied. "Give Emma a kiss for me. She made you something, wants you to wear it tomorrow." Harrison opened the package they'd sent. Inside was a small drawing, clearly by Emma's hand. It showed Aigwood standing tall, surrounded by hearts. Beneath it, in wobbly letters, "My daddy protects history." He pinned it carefully inside his tunic, close to his heart. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. But for tonight, he was simply a father, a husband, a soldier carrying centuries of tradition on his shoulders. The Queen's Guard had weathered every storm Britain had faced for over 350 years. They'd endure this one too, not through violence or intimidation, but through the quiet strength that had always been their true power. Harrison closed his eyes, picturing Emma practicing her march. Tomorrow, he'd show her what that march really meant. Dawn broke over London with an eerie calm. Harrison stood at his window in the Tower Barracks, watching the first rays of sun paint the ancient stones gold. Below, media vans were already setting up their equipment, drawn by rumors of what was being called the Guard's last stand. Social media had exploded overnight. Thousands of posts tagged "Final Guard Challenge" showed people streaming into London from across Europe. Some came for chaos, others for clicks, all hoping to be part of what they believed would be the end of a centuries-old tradition. "Latest intelligence report, sir," Stevens said, entering with a thick folder. "They're organizing into groups. Professional, provocateurs, political activists, social media influencers, even some ex-military types. Each with their own agenda, but all converging on tomorrow's ceremony." Harrison studied the surveillance photos. Among the faces he spotted Thorne, no longer playing injured victim. The former soldier moved with purpose now, coordinating with various group leaders. Despite Blackstone's collapse, he'd found a new cause, proving that the guards' takedown of him wasn't a fluke. "What's our final count?" Harrison asked, though he already knew the answer. "Conservative estimate, 2,000 dedicated agitators, another 5,000 opportunists, plus the usual tourist crowd." Stevens paused. "Sir, even with police support, we're outnumbered 20 to 1. Harrison nodded, turning to the map spread across his desk. The changing of the guard ceremony would be their most vulnerable moment, when tradition required them to move in precise, predictable patterns. The perfect opportunity for those seeking to provoke a response. Captain Williams had authorized unprecedented measures. Armed response teams would be disguised in the crowd. Snipers would maintain overwatch from strategic positions. Every guard would wear body cameras, documenting any provocations. But Harrison knew it wouldn't be enough. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. She'd sent a photo of Emma at her grandparents' house in Scotland, wearing her homemade guard uniform, standing at perfect attention. The caption read, "She insisted on practicing for when you come home." The image steeled his resolve. This wasn't just about protecting a ceremony or tradition. It was about preserving something precious for the next generation, something worth standing for. A commotion outside drew his attention. Through the window, he saw a group of young men recording themselves as they mocked the guards' march, growing bolder as they approached the tower's entrance, testing the waters for tomorrow. "Sir?" Private Wilson, one of their youngest guards, appeared at the door. "The men are asking. Some of them want to know if we should call in sick tomorrow. Avoid the whole thing." Harrison turned from the window, his expression firm. "Tell them to prepare their uniforms. Tomorrow, we show them what the Queen's Guard really stands for." The day passed in a blur of final preparations. Each guard's uniform was inspected with exceptional care. Ceremonial swords were checked and rechecked. Emergency protocols were rehearsed, until they became muscle memory. As evening fell, Harrison gathered the guards in the ancient Tower Chapel for a final briefing. The stone walls, that had witnessed centuries of British history, seemed to lend weight to his words. "Tomorrow they'll try to provoke us, to make us break. They want to prove we're relics, dangerous anachronisms in the modern world." He looked at each face in turn, some young, some seasoned, all carrying the weight of tradition on their shoulders. "But we're not here for them. We're here for every guard who's stood watch since 1660. For every parent who brings their child to see what dedication looks like. For every moment in history these walls have witnessed." The chapel fell silent, his words echoing off ancient stones. "Remember your training, remember your duty. But most of all, remember why we stand our posts. Not for show, not for tourists, but because some traditions are worth preserving. Some duties are worth any price." Later that night, alone in his quarters, Harrison polished his buttons one final time. The familiar ritual centered him, as it had countless times before. On his desk sat Emma's drawing, next to a photo of Sarah. Tomorrow would determine not just his future, but the future of an institution that had guarded Britain's heart for over 3 centuries. Outside his window, he could hear the growing crowd, the excited chatter, the occasional shout of challenge. Tomorrow would test them all, but tonight, in the quiet of the tower, Harrison allowed himself a small smile. They thought the guard was vulnerable during the ceremony. They were about to learn why tradition had survived so long. The morning of the changing of the guard ceremony dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself wanted an unobstructed view of what was to come. Harrison stood before his mirror, each movement precise as he donned his ceremonial uniform. The weight of the bearskin hat settled on his head like a crown. The rifle's familiar form grounded him in centuries of tradition. Through his window, he could see the crowds already gathering. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras ready to capture whatever chaos might unfold. Social media influencers jostled for position, their phones raised like weapons. "Control to all posts," Captain Williams's voice crackled through their earpieces. Multiple groups converging in parade routes. "Confirmed sighting of Thorn near Victoria Gate. All units, maintain Protocol Delta." Protocol Delta, their new response plan. Instead of reacting to provocations, they would demonstrate why the guard had endured for centuries. Not through force, but through unwavering dignity and discipline. Harrison marched to his position, each step measured and precise. The crowd parted before him, phones recording his every move. He caught glimpses of familiar faces, professional agitators they'd tracked, social media stars hoping for their viral moment, and there, watching from the shadows, Thorn himself. The first test came early. A group of motorcyclists revved their engines during the inspection, the noise echoing off the tower walls. In the past, the ceremony would have paused. Today, the guards moved with mechanical precision, their synchronization, making the bikers' display seem childish in comparison. "They're pushing through the barriers at Point Charlie," Stevens reported through the comms. Harrison could hear the strain in his voice. "At least 50 of them. They're trying to disrupt the formation." Shouts and jeers filled the air as the ceremony proceeded. Objects were thrown, water bottles, coins, insults. Each projectile was met with the same response: nothing. The guards moved like automation, their precision making even the most determined provocateur look foolish. Thorn made his move during the march. He stepped into the formation's path, chain in hand, playing to the cameras. "Come on then, soldier. Boys, show us what you're really made of." Harrison's eyes met Thorn's for a brief moment. In that gaze was everything. The warrior beneath the ceremony, the soldier behind the spectacle. But instead of engaging, the formation simply parted. Around him, their movements so precise it seemed choreographed. Thorn was left standing alone, his challenge made hollow by their disciplined indifference. The crowd's mood began to shift. What had started as mockery turned to reluctant admiration. The guards' unwavering discipline in the face of chaos highlighted the petty nature of their tormentors. Phones still recorded, but now they captured something unexpected: the power of tradition to withstand any storm. As the ceremony reached its climax, Harrison felt a familiar presence. Through the crowd, he glimpsed Sarah and Emma, standing at a safe distance. His daughter wore her paper bearskin hat, her small frame at perfect attention, mimicking his stance. In her eyes, he saw not the social media circus or the political games, but the pure admiration of a child for something greater than herself. The ceremony concluded without the expected violence, but with something more powerful, a demonstration of why the Queen's Guard had endured. Not through force of arms, but through force of will. Not by responding to provocation, but by rising above it. Later, as the crowds dispersed and the media searched for a story that hadn't materialized, Harrison found Thorn waiting by the tower gate. "You've won this round," Thorn admitted grudgingly. "But the world's changing, soldier. How long can you hold out against the tide?" Harrison adjusted his bearskin hat, Emma's drawing still pinned inside his tunic. "As long as there are those who believe in something greater than viral fame. As long as tradition means more than trending topics." He left Thorn there, walking to where Sarah and Emma waited. His daughter rushed to him, her paper hat askew, her eyes shining with pride. "Did you see me, Daddy? I stood just like you." Harrison lifted her up, feeling the weight of his uniform, of his duty, of 3 centuries of tradition. "Yes, love, you stood perfect guard." The sun set over the Tower of London, its ancient stones having witnessed yet another chapter in its long history. The Queen's Guard had faced its greatest modern challenge not with violence or force, but with the quiet power of unwavering duty. And somewhere in London, a child practiced her march, dreaming of the day she too would stand guard over history. The success of the changing of the guard ceremony should have been a victory. Instead, as Harrison sat in Captain Williams' office the next morning, he could feel the gathering storm. The footage had gone viral, but not in the way their opponents had hoped. The guard's unwavering discipline in the face of chaos had struck a chord with millions. "They're calling it the perfect guard," Stevens reported, scrolling through social media feeds. "Our video has more views than all the provocateur clips combined. But..." He hesitated, glancing at Harrison. "But now we're an even bigger target," Harrison finished. The morning's intelligence briefings confirmed it. What had started as a campaign to discredit the Guard had become something more dangerous, a challenge to break the unbreakable. Williams spread surveillance photos across his desk. These were taken in the last 6 hours. Former military contractors, extremist groups, professional agitators, all heading to London. They saw yesterday's ceremony as a challenge, not a deterrent. The photos showed familiar faces from global hotspots, men who treated violence as a profession. Among them, Harrison spotted Thorne, no longer playing the victim. The ex-soldier moved with purpose now, coordinating with various group leaders. "There's more," Stevens added quietly. They found Sarah's hospital, started posting her schedule online, Emma's school too. Harrison's jaw tightened. He'd sent them to Scotland to keep them safe, but in the age of social media, nowhere was truly secure. The thought of his family being targeted made his blood boil, but he forced the anger down. Emotion was what they wanted. Reaction was their goal. "What's our status?" he asked instead, focusing on what he could control. Williams pointed to the tower's defense plans. "We've increased security coordinated with police, but we can't lock down the tower. It's a tourist site open to the public. And with the royal visit scheduled for next week." The royal visit, the real reason behind the increased pressure. Their opponents had failed to break the guards' discipline, but they'd succeeded in creating a security nightmare. Every intelligence agency in Britain was warning against proceeding with the visit, but the Crown had been adamant. They wouldn't be seen retreating from their own ceremonial guard. Harrison studied the plans, his military mind cataloging vulnerabilities. The tower's ancient walls had withstood centuries of attacks, but this was different. Their enemies weren't trying to break in. They were already inside, hidden among the tourists, phones ready to capture any crack in the guard's facade. "Sir," he said finally, "we need to change our approach. They're expecting us to be purely defensive, to just stand and take it like we did yesterday. But what if we showed them something else? Not violence, but..." As he outlined his plan, William's expression shifted from skepticism to careful consideration. It was unprecedented, breaking with centuries of tradition. But then again, so were the threats they faced. "It's risky," Williams warned. "If it goes wrong..." "With respect, sir, everything's risky now. They're not just attacking our posts anymore. They're attacking our families, our identity, everything we stand for." Stevens nodded in agreement. "The men are ready, sir. Yesterday showed them what we can achieve together. But we need to do more than just stand there and take it." Williams was silent for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, he reached for his phone. "I'll need to clear this with higher command. In the meantime, get the men ready. Whatever comes next, we face it, prepared." As Harrison left the office, his phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Emma won't take off her guard hat. Says she's practicing to be strong like Daddy." Attached was a photo of his daughter, standing at perfect attention in her makeshift uniform, face set in the same stoic expression she'd seen her father maintain. The image strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about protecting a post or a ceremony anymore. It was about preserving something worth standing for, something worth passing on to the next generation. In the barracks, he found the other guards preparing for their shifts. The usual banter was gone, replaced by focused determination. They'd tasted victory yesterday, but they knew it was only the beginning. Private Wilson, their youngest guard, approached with concern in his eyes. "Sir, my sister sent me this." He held out his phone, showing a social media post. It detailed plans for a coordinated assault on multiple guard posts, timed to coincide with the royal visit. The level of organization was frightening. "They're not just random troublemakers anymore," Wilson continued. "These are professionals. They know our protocols, our response patterns. They've studied us." Harrison nodded. "Then it's time they learned something new about the Queen's Guard. Gather the men. Training begins in 10 minutes. What followed was unlike any guard preparation in the tower's history. Harrison drew on his combat experience, teaching them not just to stand and take abuse, but to control the space around them. Every movement had meaning, every position served a purpose. "They think we're just statues," he told the assembled guards, "that our discipline is a weakness. Today, we show them that standing fast doesn't mean standing helpless." By evening, the changes were subtle but significant. The guards moved differently, their ceremonial precision now underlaid with tactical awareness. They weren't just holding posts, they were controlling them. As night fell over London, Harrison made one final call to Scotland. Emma's voice was excited as she told him about practicing her marching. "Daddy, when can we come home? I want to stand guard with you." "Soon, love," he promised, though his heart ached at the separation. "Right now I need you to be brave and strong, just like we talked about. Like a real guard. Like a real guard." After saying goodnight, Harrison walked the tower walls. Below, the city lights twinkled, helicopters circled, and somewhere out there forces gathered for what they hoped would be the guards' final humiliation. Let them come, he thought. The Queen's Guard had weathered every storm Britain had faced. For over 350 years, they'd weather this one too. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Every guard post was reviewed, every ceremony rehearsed with their new protocols. Harrison drove his men hard, knowing that the coming storm would test them all. Intelligence reports grew more concerning by the hour. Stephen's network of contacts painted a picture of coordinated chaos in the making. Groups that normally wouldn't work together were forming alliances, all focused on one goal: breaking the Queen's Guard. They're calling it the ultimate challenge, Stevens reported during the evening briefing. Social media's on fire with it. Every wannabe viral star and professional provocateur in Europe is heading our way. But that's not what worries me. He pulled up surveillance photos showing familiar faces. Former military, private security contractors, even some ex-police. These weren't attention seekers. They were professionals who knew how to create and exploit chaos. Thorne's been busy, Harrison observed, studying the images. The ex-soldier had transformed from social media victim to field commander, coordinating the various groups with military precision. His knowledge of guard protocols, combined with the others' expertise, made them genuinely dangerous. Captain Williams entered with fresh intelligence. MI5's picked up chatter about weapons being moved into London. Nothing lethal. They want to humiliate us, not martyr us, but enough to create serious problems. Smoke grenades, flashbangs, the sort of thing that could turn a ceremony into chaos. Harrison absorbed this, his mind already gaming out scenarios. Their new protocols would help, but against this level of organization, they needed more. "What about the royal visit?" Stevens asked. "Surely they'll cancel now." Williams shook his head. "The Crown's been clear. Cancelling would be seen as surrendering to social media pressure. The visit proceeds as planned." The implications hung heavy in the room. If they failed to protect the royal visitors, it wouldn't just be the end of their careers, it would be the end of the Queen's Guard itself. Centuries of tradition would die in a viral video. Harrison's phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. Emma had been asking questions about why people wanted to hurt the guards. How did you explain social media fame and cynical manipulation to a 5-year-old who still saw the world in terms of heroes and duty? "Sir," Private Wilson called from the door. "You need to see this." The guardroom's monitors showed live feeds. From around the tower, small groups were gathering, testing security, filming guard reactions. But something was different now. They moved with purpose, their provocations precise and coordinated. "They're probing our defenses," Harrison realized. "Running reconnaissance for the main event." Williams studied the footage. "How long until they make their move?" "They'll wait for the royal visit," Harrison said with certainty. "Maximum impact, maximum audience. Everything we're seeing now is just preparation." The captain nodded grimly. "Then we prepare too." "Harrison, I'm giving you tactical command for the operation. Whatever you need, you've got it." Harrison looked around the room at his fellow guards. Some were veterans like him, others barely old enough to remember a world before viral videos. All of them carried the weight of centuries on their shoulders. "We start tonight," he announced. "Full dress rehearsal, new protocols, and I want every man to understand exactly what we're fighting for. This isn't just about standing our posts anymore. This is about showing the world why the Guard has endured for over 3 centuries. As the guards filed out to prepare, Stevens held Harrison back. "There's something else. Thorne's been asking questions about your family, specific questions." Harrison's blood ran cold. "They're safe in Scotland." "Are they?" "Social media, remember? One wrong check-in, one tagged photo." The threat to his family added personal urgency to an already critical situation. But Harrison forced the emotion down, channeling it into focus. Anger would only give their opponents what they wanted. That night, as the tower grew quiet, Harrison made one final round of the posts. Each guard stood perfect watch, their new awareness evident in subtle ways. They weren't just ceremonial figures anymore, they were warriors in dress uniforms, ready for whatever came. In his quarters, Harrison laid out his uniform for the coming days. The brass buttons gleamed, the ceremonial sword hung ready, the bearskin hat stood proud. Inside the hat's lining, he tucked Emma's drawing, a reminder of what they were really protecting. His phone lit up with a final message from Sarah. "Stay safe. Emma says to remember you're her hero, no matter what happens." Outside, London slept, unaware of the storm gathering in its heart. But within the tower's ancient walls, the Queen's Guard prepared to show the world that some traditions were worth any price to preserve. The next few days would test them all. But as Harrison finally lay down to rest, he felt a strange calm. Let them come with their cameras and provocations. The Guard had faced worse in its long history. Tomorrow they would remind the world why. The morning of the royal visit dawned grey and cold. Harrison stood at his post, the Tower of London's ancient stones looming behind him as the first hints of trouble began to surface. Through his earpiece, he could hear the steady stream of security updates. Multiple groups converging on the north entrance. Suspect packages identified at checkpoints 3 and 5. Facial recognition confirms known agitators in the crowd. The tourists were arriving in unprecedented numbers, drawn by social media promises of an historic event. Among them, Harrison's trained eye picked out the threats, the too casual stance of ex-military men, the calculated positioning of professional provocateurs, the ready phones of those hoping to capture chaos. "Control to all posts," Captain Williams's voice crackled through the comms. "Royal party approaching Tower Bridge, 5 minutes to arrival. Implement Protocol Echo." Protocol Echo, their new defense strategy. Harrison had drilled the men relentlessly in its execution. Now, as the crowd pressed closer, he could see his fellow guards subtly adjusting their positions, creating invisible barriers of controlled space. Through the growing mass of spectators, he spotted Thorne. The ex-soldier moved with purpose, coordinating with various group leaders through subtle hand signals. No longer playing victim, he now commanded a small army of chaos seekers, each positioned to strike at crucial moments. "Sir," Stephen's voice was tight with concern. "Social media's exploding. They're calling everyone to converge on the tower." The crowd's triple what we expected. Harrison maintained his ceremonial stance, but his combat-trained senses were cataloging every detail. The growing tension in the air, the way certain groups were maneuvering into position, the glint of something metallic being passed between hands. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the crowd, half hidden behind tourists with cameras, stood Sarah, and beside her, wearing her paper bearskin hat, was Emma. His family was supposed to be safe in Scotland. Their presence here could only mean one thing. Thorne had found them, forced them to come, knowing their presence would shake Harrison's resolve at the critical moment. "Harrison to control. We have a situation. My family..." "Already spotted," Williams interrupted. "Extraction team moving into position. Stand fast, stand fast." The guard's eternal command. But every fiber of Harrison's being screamed to move, to protect his wife and daughter from what was coming. The crowd's roar announced the royal party's arrival. Through the tower gates came the procession of ceremonial vehicles, each one a potential target. Harrison could see the other guards tensing imperceptibly, ready for anything. Thorne made his first move. A smoke grenade arced through the air, designed to cause panic and disrupt the ceremony. But the guard was ready. Before the device could land, a hidden security team neutralized it with practiced efficiency. The crowd surged forward, phones raised as multiple incidents erupted simultaneously. Groups of provocateurs rushed the barriers. Flashbangs exploded at strategic points, voices raised in orchestrated chaos. But the Queen's Guard didn't react as expected. Instead of standing rigid, they moved with fluid precision, their ceremonial drill transforming into a perfectly coordinated defense. Each guard became the center of a controlled space, their very presence creating order in the chaos. "They're targeting the royal party," Stephen's warning came as a group of ex-military contractors made their move, pushing through the crowd with professional determination. Harrison's position was critical. He could stop them, but it would mean breaking formation, giving Thorne exactly the viral moment he wanted. Then he saw Emma's face in the crowd, watching her father with complete trust, and knew what he had to do. His movement was pure precision. The ceremonial rifle became a barrier, his drill-perfect stance a defensive position. The contractors found themselves suddenly contained, their coordination disrupted by the guards' unexpected tactics. Now, Thorne's voice carried over the chaos. More smoke grenades, more flashbangs, but for each disruption the guard had an answer. Their ceremonial drilling became a dance of control, containing threats without ever breaking character. The crowd's mood began to shift. What had started as excitement for promised chaos transformed into admiration. Phones still recorded, but now they captured something unexpected. The power of discipline over disorder, tradition over trending moments. Harrison caught glimpses of the battle unfolding around him. Stevens coordinating the Western defense. Wilson, their youngest guard, standing unshakable against a wave of provocateurs, each man demonstrating why the guard had endured for centuries. Then he saw Thorne moving towards Sarah and Emma, using them as his final gambit. The ex-soldier's face was twisted with frustrated rage. If he couldn't break the guard with chaos, he'd do it with a more personal attack. "Come on, soldier," Thorne shouted, grabbing Emma's arm. "Show them what you really are. Show them the violence." Behind the ceremony, Emma didn't cry out. Instead, she stood straight, just as she'd practiced, her paper bearskin hat still perfectly in place. In that moment, she was every inch a guard's daughter. Harrison's response was textbook perfection. His ceremonial movement transformed into a controlled advance, each step precise, each motion measured. Not a charge or an attack, but an unstoppable force of disciplined authority. "Last chance, Harrison." Thorne's voice cracked with desperation. "Break formation. Show them what you'll sacrifice for duty." But Harrison didn't break. He didn't need to. His unwavering advance, backed by the combined presence of the other guards, created a wall of ceremonial authority that even Thorne couldn't resist. The ex-soldier's grip on Emma loosened. His carefully orchestrated chaos was falling apart, defeated, not by violence but by the very discipline he'd tried to break. Metropolitan Police moved in, their timing perfect. Thorne and his key lieutenants were quietly arrested, their planned spectacle ending not with viral violence, but with efficient justice. The royal party completed their visit without further incident, but the real victory was written on the faces of the watching crowd. They'd come expecting entertainment, expecting guards to break. Instead, they'd... On the tower. The crowd's triple what we expected. Harrison maintained his ceremonial stance, but his combat-trained senses were cataloging every detail. The growing tension in the air, the way certain groups were maneuvering into position, the glint of something metallic being passed between hands. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the crowd, half hidden behind tourists with cameras, stood Sarah. And beside her, wearing her paper bearskin hat, was Emma. His family was supposed to be safe in Scotland. Their presence here could only mean one thing. Thorne had found them, forced them to come, knowing their presence would shake Harrison's resolve at the critical moment. Harrison to control. "We have a situation. My family." "Already spotted." Williams interrupted. "Extraction team moving into position. Stand fast. Stand fast." The guard's eternal command. But every fiber of Harrison's being screamed to move, to protect his wife and daughter from what was coming. The crowd's roar announced the royal party's arrival. Through the tower gates came the procession of ceremonial vehicles, each one a potential target. Harrison could see the other guards tensing imperceptibly, ready for anything. Thorne made his first move. A smoke grenade arced through the air, designed to cause panic and disrupt the ceremony. But the guard was ready. Before the device could land, a hidden security team neutralized it with practiced efficiency. The crowd surged forward, phones raised, as multiple incidents erupted simultaneously. Groups of provocateurs rushed the barriers. Flashbangs exploded at strategic points, voices raised in orchestrated chaos. But the Queen's Guard didn't react as expected. Instead of standing rigid, they moved with fluid precision, their ceremonial drill, transforming into a perfectly coordinated defense. Each guard became the center of a controlled space, their very presence creating order in the chaos. They're targeting the royal party. Stephen's warning came as a group of ex-military contractors made their move, pushing through the crowd with professional determination. Harrison's position was critical. He could stop them, but it would mean breaking formation, giving Thorne exactly the viral moment he wanted. Then he saw Emma's face in the crowd, watching her father with complete trust, and knew what he had to do. His movement was pure precision. The ceremonial rifle became a barrier, his drill-perfect stance a defensive position. The contractors found themselves suddenly contained, their coordination disrupted by the guards' unexpected tactics. Now! Thorne's voice carried over the chaos. More smoke grenades, more flashbangs. But for each disruption, the guard had an answer. Their ceremonial drilling became a dance of control, containing threats without ever breaking character. The crowd's mood began to shift. What had started as excitement for promised chaos transformed into admiration. Phones still recorded, but now they captured something unexpected. The power of discipline over disorder, tradition over trending moments. Harrison caught glimpses of the battle unfolding around him. Stevens coordinating the Western defense, Wilson, their youngest guard, standing unshakable against a wave of provocateurs. Each man demonstrating why the guard had endured for centuries. Then he saw Thorne moving towards Sarah and Emma, using them as his final gambit. The ex-soldier's face was twisted with frustrated rage. If he couldn't break the guard with chaos, he'd do it with a more personal attack. "Come on, soldier!" Thorne shouted, grabbing Emma's arm. "Show them what you really are. Show them the violence behind the ceremony." Emma didn't cry out. Instead, she stood straight, just as she'd practiced, her paper bearskin hat still perfectly in place. In that moment, she was every inch a guard's daughter. Harrison's response was textbook perfection. His ceremonial movement transformed into a controlled advance. Each step precise, each motion measured. Not a charge or an attack, but an unstoppable force of disciplined authority. "Last chance, Harrison." Thorne's voice cracked with desperation. "Break formation. Show them what you'll sacrifice for duty." But Harrison didn't break. He didn't need to. His unwavering advance, backed by the combined presence of the other guards, created a wall of ceremonial authority that even Thorne couldn't resist. The ex-soldier's grip on Emma loosened. His carefully orchestrated chaos was falling apart, defeated, not by violence, but by the very discipline he'd tried to break. Metropolitan Police moved in, their timing perfect. Thorne and his key lieutenants were quietly arrested, their planned spectacle ending not with viral violence, but with efficient justice. The royal party completed their visit without further incident. But the real victory was written on the faces of the watching crowd. They'd come expecting entertainment, expecting guards to break. Instead, they'd witnessed the power of unwavering duty. Later, as the tower settled back into its ancient rhythms, Harrison finally broke formation to embrace his family. Emma looked up at him, her paper hat askew, but her pride unbounded. "Did I do good, Daddy? I stood just like you taught me." Harrison lifted her up, feeling the weight of his uniform, of his duty, of the day's events. "You did perfect, love. You stood like a true guard." Sarah's eyes were wet with pride and relief. "They wanted us to be your weakness," she said softly. "They didn't understand that we're your strength." Around them, the other guards maintained their posts, but with a renewed sense of purpose. They'd faced modern chaos with timeless discipline and emerged stronger. Videos of their response were already going viral, but not for the reasons their opponents had hoped. Captain Williams found Harrison as evening fell. "That was a risk, Sergeant, using ceremonial drill as tactical movement, breaking 300 years of tradition." "No, sir," Harrison replied, watching Emma practice her march across the courtyard. "Not breaking tradition, proving why it endures." The sun set over the Tower of London, its ancient stones having witnessed yet another chapter in its long history. The Queen's Guard had faced its greatest modern challenge not with violence or reaction, but with the quiet power of unwavering discipline. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, a child in a paper bearskin hat stood guard over her own dreams, carrying tradition forward into a new generation. 1 week after the failed attack on the tower, Harrison stood in full ceremonial dress before a different audience. The Queen's Guard had been summoned to Buckingham Palace for a special ceremony, not to stand watch, but to be honored. The palace's grand ballroom was filled with dignitaries, military leaders, and members of the royal family. But Harrison's eyes were fixed on the front row, where Emma sat between Sarah and Captain Williams, her paper bearskin hat replaced with a real one, a gift from the Guard Regiment. The events at the Tower of London, the royal commander began, tested not just the Guard's ability to maintain security, but the very relevance of our ceremonial traditions in the modern age. Through discipline, innovation, and unwavering dedication to duty, the Queen's Guard proved that some traditions endure because they embody timeless virtues. The commendation that followed spoke of exemplary service and tactical brilliance, but Harrison knew their victory went deeper. Videos of the Guard's response had gone viral for unexpected reasons. The world had watched ceremony transform into controlled authority, tradition become tactical advantage. Queen's Guard discipline had replaced jarring guard challenge as the trending topic. Thorne and his key conspirators faced serious charges. The investigation had revealed a deeper plot, foreign interests attempting to undermine British institutions through social media manipulation. But they'd failed to understand what made the Guard different. It wasn't the uniforms or the ceremony, but the unwavering spirit beneath. After the ceremony, Harrison found his family in the palace gardens. Emma was showing a young prince her perfect guard stance, while Sarah chatted with other military spouses who'd faced similar challenges. Sergeant Harrison. Captain Williams approached, his ceremonial uniform gleaming. The commission has made their decision about the Guard's future role. Harrison tensed slightly. Despite their victory, questions had lingered about modernizing the Guard, adapting to changing times. They've approved your tactical adaptations, Williams continued. Future Guards will be trained in your ceremonial defense protocols. But, he smiled, the traditional ceremony remains unchanged. As you proved, it's not a weakness to be replaced, but a strength to be understood. The implications were clear. The Guard would evolve, but its core, the discipline, the dedication, the unwavering stance, would endure, just as it had for centuries. Later that evening, back at their London flat, Harrison helped Emma prepare for bed. Her guard hat sat proudly on a shelf alongside his own, 2 generations of dedication to duty. "Daddy," she asked sleepily, "can girls be in the Queen's Guard?" Harrison smiled, thinking of her perfect stance during Thorne's confrontation. "Times are changing, love. Maybe by the time you're old enough they will be." Sarah watched from the doorway as their daughter finally drifted off. "She's already got the discipline part down," she said softly. "Haven't seen her break stance once since that day." Harrison pulled his wife close, grateful for her strength through everything. Their viral fame had faded, but their family had emerged stronger. Like the Guard itself, they'd faced the storm together. The next morning, Harrison returned to his post at the tower. Tourists still took photos, but there was a new respect in their approach. Children practiced the Guard March with serious faces. Parents explained the meaning behind the ceremony. Stevens met him at the guard room. "It's different now, isn't it?" Harrison nodded, preparing his uniform for another day of duty. The weight of his bearskin hat felt right, carrying not just tradition, but proven purpose. Through the window, he could see new guards being trained. In the courtyard, learning both ceremonial drill and its tactical applications. The old and the new, working in perfect harmony. Emma's drawing still hung inside his guard box, but now it had company, photos and letters from people around the world who'd been inspired by the Guard stand. Each one understood what Thorne never had. True strength isn't in breaking things, but in standing fast for what matters. The morning sun caught the tower's ancient stones as Harrison took his post. 300 years of tradition stood with him, proven worthy of preserving. And somewhere in London, a little girl in a guard hat stood at attention, ready to carry that tradition forward. Some challenges are met with force. Others, as the Queen's Guard had proven, are best answered with unwavering dignity and disciplined resolve. 5 years after the events at the Tower of London, Sergeant James Harrison stood once again at his post, the morning sun warming his ceremonial uniform. The brass buttons gleamed just as brightly, the bearskin hat sate just as proudly. But much had changed in those intervening years. The tower's ancient stones had witnessed a transformation. Where once tourists simply snapped photos, they now came to understand. Children no longer mimicked the Guard March as a joke. They practiced it with serious dedication, learning about the discipline and duty it represented. The Queen's Guard had become more than a tourist attraction. It had become a symbol of unwavering resolve in an age of constant change. Harrison watched as a young girl in a crisp uniform approached his post, her stride perfect, her bearing unmistakable. Emma, now 10, had grown into her role as a guard's daughter with remarkable grace. She'd started a tradition at her school, a cadet program based on guard principles, teaching other children about discipline, duty, and standing fast in the face of challenges. "Remember, everyone." Emma's voice carried across the courtyard as she led her latest group of young cadets. "It's not about standing still. It's about standing for something." The words brought a hidden smile to Harrison's face. She'd been paying attention all these years. Sarah, watching from nearby, caught his eye briefly. She'd become an advocate in her own right, working with military families to help them understand and cope with the public aspects of service. The viral fame that had once threatened to tear their family apart had instead given them a platform to help others. The Guard itself had evolved, adapting Harrison's innovations into standard training. New recruits learned not just ceremonial drill, but the tactical applications of discipline. Standing fast had taken on new meaning, not rigid resistance but controlled, purposeful presence. Thorne's attack, meant to destroy the Guard's reputation, had instead cemented its relevance. The videos of that day were now used in military training worldwide, demonstrating how discipline could overcome chaos, how tradition could adapt without breaking. Captain Williams, now Colonel, approached Harrison's post as the morning crowd began to gather. 5 years, he said quietly, once he was close enough. Sometimes I wonder if Thorne knows what he really started. Harrison maintained his stance, but his voice carried quiet pride. He wanted to prove we were obsolete. Instead, he proved why we endure. The statistics told the story. Applications to join the Queen's Guard had tripled. Ceremonial units worldwide had adopted their training protocols. Even private security firms now emphasized discipline over force, understanding that true authority came from control, not confrontation. But the real change was visible in the faces of those who visited the tower. They no longer came expecting entertainment. They came seeking understanding. Every day, Harrison saw fathers teaching sons about dedication, mothers showing daughters that strength came in many forms. Stevens, now chief instructor for new guards, had developed a saying: "We don't stand guard over buildings, we stand guard over values." The younger guards embraced this philosophy, understanding that their role went beyond ceremony. Emma's cadet group finished their morning drill, each child standing proud in their makeshift uniforms. Among them, Harrison noticed a familiar face, Thorne's son, sent by his mother after the divorce. The boy had found in the cadet program what his father had lost somewhere along the way. The understanding that true strength lies not in breaking things, but in standing firm for what matters. As the morning sun climbed higher, Harrison reflected on the legacy they'd built. The Queen's Guard had faced its greatest challenge not with force or violence, but with unwavering dignity and disciplined resolve. In doing so, they'd proven that some traditions endure not because they resist change, but because they embody timeless truths. New group of tourists approached, phones ready, but instead of looking for spectacle, they sought inspiration. Harrison stood his post as generations of guards had before him, knowing that each perfect stance, each measured step, carried forward a legacy of dedication. Emma caught his eye one last time before leading her cadets away. Her bearing was perfect, her dedication absolute. In her, Harrison saw the future of everything they'd fought to preserve, not just ceremony and tradition, but the unwavering spirit that gave them meaning. The tower's ancient stones had witnessed centuries of history. Now they stood witness to something new. The quiet power of standing fast in a world of constant motion, the strength found not in breaking but in remaining unbroken. And somewhere in London, a new generation prepared to take their posts, understanding at last what it truly meant to stand guard, not over places or ceremonies, but over the timeless values that made them worth preserving. This was the real victory, Harrison realized. Not the medals or commendations, but the understanding that had spread from that one moment of chaos. The knowledge that some things were worth standing for, no matter what storms might come. The Queen's Guard had not just survived the modern age. It had shown why it would always be needed, as long as there were values worth guarding, traditions worth preserving, and principles worth standing fast to protect. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.